first. When I present this, of course, I need to ask who wants a beautiful home landscape? And I think the answer to that is everybody. We all want our home to reflect our own personal styles, our own personal needs, and we want it to look in a way that we think is aesthetically pleasing. And so I think that's why you are all joining us today. But the other question that I like to ask is who knows exactly what you want? There's a difference between wanting something that's beautiful and knowing what that means, being able to define that. And gets a little more tricky when it comes to your home landscape. And then finally, if you do know the answer to that previous question, do you know exactly how to achieve that goal? So putting your defined objectives into practice is the next kind of stumbling block that people encounter. And so these are kind of the central questions that I want us to spend time talking about today and hopefully move the needle on. Maybe you won't know exactly what your objectives are, but you'll have some resources and some ideas once you leave our time together today. Or perhaps you are just completely overwhelmed, and that is okay too. I have spent my entire life outdoors, enjoying the landscape, playing in the landscape, playing in the garden. I have made all of the mistakes, it feels like. Probably not. I probably have more to make. You've probably made some mistakes. What I want us to embrace today is that if you've made mistakes or if you're overwhelmed and don't know where to start, that is okay, but we need to keep moving forward because nothing is going to change if we get stuck. And you'll hear me say this in a minute here, but I'll give you a little spoiler alert, which is that there's actually no perfect way to design your landscape. So this feeling of overwhelmed, you can maybe rein in a little bit and just find comfort in knowing that like we can actually do something. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, we can change it because the landscape is always evolving. And we can update things as we need. So let's get into it. So what is landscape design all about? Well, at the heart of it, basically, designing your landscape is about solving problems in your landscape. These can be actual environmental problems. Maybe you have too much water in a certain area, or you have a need to retain soil, or you need shade. There's a lot of different problems that we can define in a landscape, but we want to solve those through landscape design. And so we solve some problems by defining outdoor spaces, doing something in them, creating and modifying those spaces so that it enhances our life. Sometimes that can be a very functional, like we just need the water to stop running into the basement. That is a life-enhancing change we can make. Or it can be something where we want a place where we can sit and relax at the end of the day. Both of those challenges, those problems, when we can solve them through outdoor space definition and design, can enhance our lives. This is the bad news, is that there's actually no one way to solve any of these problems or solve any of these challenges. There's actually a lot of different ways to solve these challenges. And so that can be where that overwhelm comes from. But again, I teased this, and this was the spoiler alert, which is that horticulture and landscape design by extension is actually a combination of art and science. So of course we're going to apply good horticultural science practices to the landscape, but we also get to have a little bit of fun playing with it and defining things through an artistic perspective. And so it's a combination. And so while science can be pretty finite, art can be personalized. And so it can be fun to apply this to our landscape. So let's go through just a little bit of the step by step. And so you have, once we leave here, you have a checklist, if you will, of things to do so you can advance your own landscape. So first, before we choose, any plants or we pick out any hardscape materials or we do any sort of construction or maneuvering in the landscape, we need to talk about and sit and make some decisions about our site goals. Sometimes these are obvious. Sometimes they can be harder to tease out and harder to define, but it's worth the effort in the forefront so that then at the end, when we're making decisions, you can make sure that you are achieving, in fact, what you want the site to achieve. So first, we want to look at what the user wants, and I'm talking about all of the users of this site. So the you know, your spouse or your partner, your kids, your grandkids, your neighbor, your pets, your and anybody that's using the space that you want to use the space, what do they need to make it comfortable, usable, safe? So once you have that defined, and you can help get definition to that by having conversations with these different user groups, and and thinking about how they use it throughout the year. Then you want to move into the aesthetics. How do you want the space to look? There's a lot of different ways to make a space, to decorate a space, if you will. And it just really comes down to like your personal aesthetic preference. So later in the presentation, we'll go through some of the different styles that have been defined. But again, they're not hard and fast. You can have artistic flexibility within them. So defining what you like, how you prefer things to look. Then you get to the economics of it. Of course, there is a cost to things. There's a cost to install and do landscape enhancements. There's also a cost of maintaining a landscape, and some landscapes require more maintenance than others. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. But being realistic and honest about what resources you have available. A beautiful landscape can be created on the slimmest of budgets with some creativity and maybe some sweat equity and some creative thinking. A beautiful landscape can also be created with the most elaborate budget. And so just be realistic about it, and then you can help avoid getting into some problems later on or hitting um, a bigger challenge when maybe finances have run out, or you've bit off more than you can chew, so to say, in the landscape. And then the function. How is it going to work? Like, we want to be in our spaces for the most part, or maybe we're not going to be in them, but we still need them to look a certain way. Like, what is the use of this space? What is it meant to do? Answering that for before you get started. And then finally, environmentally, how is it functioning? How is it working for you from an environmental standpoint? One example would be if you want to attract pollinators to your landscape, well, what do those pollinators need? And having the plants and the habitat, resources available to attract those creatures to your landscape, if that's desirable and helping support that environmental function, you're going to need to make some decisions that then will give you those outcomes. Another example would be shade. If you want to help lower some of your cooling costs in the summer, shade trees are a great way to help do that if they're located properly in the landscape. And so that is, modifying the environment. You would be modifying the environment to help achieve some goals. Now, there's a couple different options for pursuing a landscape design. I just want to hit this briefly because there are professionals that you can hire. So you can do it yourself, DIY, or you can hire a professional. And sometimes you can do a combination of the two. These professionals listed here, landscape architect, landscape contractor, garden designer, landscaper, and arborist, there's a variety of skills, of training, of talents, of certifications that they bring to the table. If you are going to hire someone, I encourage you to understand what you were looking for out of the professional and then seeking somebody to match that set of skills instead of saying, automatically say, like, I need an arborist. Well, if you're not doing tree work, an arborist probably isn't the right professional for you to hire. So just kind of know what you're looking for and then seek somebody who's a good fit before you spend a lot of money and a lot of time invested in this relationship with a person. All right, and then we need to do an assessment of our landscape. We need to see like exactly what we've got, what we're starting from, before you can then start to decide what changes or modifications are reasonable, are desirable. So first, before we move forward and do this assessment, we need to keep in mind that change is desirable and it's inevitable. Nothing in the landscape is permanent, is stagnant. It is going to be evolving and changing. And my personal experience as being a human is that life is not static. It is always changing. It is always evolving. And life situations are constantly flexing depending on the season, depending on the stage of life we're in. I look at my parents. I have young kids. They have certain needs, like they're growing and changing. We have pets, and then we don't have pets. Like these things in life for us all change and are flexible. We need to accept that. So first, we'll do a family assessment. Again, this goes back to the user needs, but let's talk about the people that are going to be using the landscape the most, which is a family. What are your present needs? Just do a quick assessment. I think it's pretty easy to identify what your present needs are. What are your future needs? Do we foresee things changing? Do we have health issues that might need to be addressed that are changing? Do we have young kids, but we plan to stay in this house for a really long time? So eventually we anticipate that they will need a different type of play space to enjoy. What is our ability from a budget standpoint to invest time and resource into the landscape? Just can we DIY it? Do we have all summer to invest in this, or are we a weekend warrior? Um, be realistic. What can we put into this landscape from a time and financial standpoint? Again, your family's aesthetic styles. Yeah. Um, do you agree on an aesthetic style? Do you have very different ideas of what your landscape should look like? If it is the latter, you're going to need to have some conversations and figure out how to navigate that difference. And then this last bullet point, I should have put in bold. I should have put in a bigger font. I should have put in red. But you have to talk about maintenance. Before you do anything in your landscape, before you make any design decisions, it is critical to understand how that landscape is going to be maintained. Because if you do not have those conversations in advance and make those plans for maintaining your landscape, again, everything changes. And what's likely going to happen is that things are going to deteriorate. You're going to have, over time, your landscape morph into something that you don't, in fact, want it to be. It's going to deteriorate. So just a few slides here to help you get the ideas started, like rolling of family needs assessment. So does your family need privacy? What level of privacy does it need? Do you live in the country? Do you live in the city? These two locations might have different requirements for privacy. You might want to screen different areas, have different needs for how your privacy is going to be achieved. Do you want to or need to grow food? Maintaining and growing flowers or herbs can take a dedicated space. Sometimes it can be incorporated into the landscape in a more artistic way. But do you want to do that in your landscape and have a space dedicated to that? How do you want your landscape to feel? Do you want it to be a private retreat and have like a calm, serene space where you can, get away from maybe a really busy work day or, a hectic life, or just somewhere to go and relax? Do you want that? Or do you want to entertain? Do you want to have parties? Do you want to have people over and enjoying and moving through the landscape? What is that space going to need to accommodate having guests over? To the same point, what size of entertaining do you want to do? There's a different need, or there's a different way to design a space that is going to accommodate, let's say, 6 people, as compared to a space that is going to accommodate 20 or 25 people. So what does that look like? Both, do you want to entertain? And if you do, what does it need to accommodate? And then finally, maybe my favorite guests are the pets. Um, do you have pets that need to be accommodated? Do you want space for your dogs to run? Do you have cats? Do you have other animals that you are going to be welcoming into your space, either domestic or not? Um, these two puppies I think are adorable. They're not my dogs. They are smaller than mine. So my dogs will require a different landscape than these dogs would require. I've got golden retrievers, so they run, they're really big, they're messy, they can cause a lot of damage and destruction. And so designing a landscape to accommodate that is going to be essential, especially when you're going to be investing in your landscape. And then kids, do you have children? What age are these children? Is it going to be a space where they, can play in the yard and have water fights? Are they bigger? Do they need a place where they can run around, like ride bikes? Do you want a pool? Do you want to have a big grass area where they can throw a football or a baseball or softball around? What do they need? What will they need? Because kids are constantly growing and their needs are constantly changing. So doing a little bit of predictive um, programming is useful. And then before we get into some of the design, elements, I want to just take a minute to address low maintenance. I think almost everybody has said to me, I want a low maintenance landscape. This is what we need. We have assessed our family's needs, and low maintenance is what we are looking for. Um, and I've never actually, come to think of it, had anybody say I want a really high maintenance landscape. So, a few words on low maintenance. First, low maintenance is subjective. It is how much you want to put into a landscape. So, low maintenance to one person may not be low maintenance to another. Um, I know some folks who really like to mow the lawn. Like that is their hobby. That's their escape. They like to do it. And so perhaps that chore, and I use that term loosely, is actually not so much a chore for them. That's a feature of the landscape is being able to mow versus a maintenance concern. Others don't. And so that's something you are going to need to discuss as a family in while you're planning your landscape needs. I will say low maintenance is not, for the most part, formal plantings, highly manicured plantings, and monocultures. I'll get into this in a few minutes, but for the most part, you can rule out anything that is going to be a very strict formal landscape if you are looking for low maintenance. What low maintenance can be is a combination of formal and informal design elements. So defined lawns with natural plantings nearby, screens and plants, like hard screens, like I had showed in the previous picture, mixed with some plants to soften the edges. Mass plantings. By mass plantings, I mean just like one species planted in multiples, generally in odd numbers, so threes, fives, sevens, sometimes nines if you have a really large mass. Um, but this is lower maintenance because you have a higher impact with less plants that you're going to need to identify and maintain. This picture here is a really good example of that. You have the defined lawn, you've got the strict edges of the paving, but then you've got the softness of the grasses around it. You also have these grasses planted in mass. There's repeating elements, and so it unifies the landscape design without having to be maintained heavily. All right. So then you actually just have to get out on your landscape and do a site assessment. You need to get some measurements. You need to jot down out. It doesn't need to be a formal drawing. You don't have to get out, necessarily get out like rulers and circles and whatnot. But you do need to know the space measurements of your landscape because especially when it comes to buying hardscape materials or putting in plant materials, these things have set dimensions. And so in order to be most cost effective, as well as for plants accommodating their mature size, you want to know what kind of space you're working with on your site. Then you want to make sure that the permanent features that are going to stay in place are noted. So your house, but also your windows in your house. Like what views are not going to go anywhere? What is going to be a site that you're looking at whenever you're looking out your kitchen window? Noting those types of spaces that aren't changing, and so you can accommodate and maybe pay more attention to the design of those views. Some of the existing features that you're going to maintain, Do you have like a pergola? Do you have, a pool? Do you have something that is going to stay in place? Conversely, do you have something that's going to be removed and you're going to take out of a space? Um, making decisions related to that. Locate your utilities. You can call 811 and have the utility company come out and locate any underground utility lines. Please do this every time you're going to dig. Um, so when it comes to moving the dirt, earthwork, you want to call the utilities again, but do it when you're doing the design. So you don't create this an elaborate design and you have all these, wonderful plans made and you find out later that it really can't be done because there's a gas line, buried in a space, or there's fiber optics that you need to avoid, planting over, or, putting a concrete pad over or whatnot. So do that in advance. It can save you a lot of heartache and frustration later. And then assess your growing conditions. When it comes later on to plant selection, plants do have certain requirements that they will do better in. So do you have compacted, soggy, clay soils? Do you have sandy, well-drained soils that are not going to hold a lot of moisture? Do you have a lot of shade? Do you have a lot of full sun? Is your space just not, big enough maybe to accommodate really large trees or spreading trees? Know what the growing conditions are. And so you're able to make decisions later on that reflect what your site is providing you. All right, here's the fun part. This is what we've all been waiting for, right? Time to get creative. So as we're going through this and starting to think about our own landscapes, and I encourage you to do that. As we go through this, think about your own challenge that you came here with. I'm suspecting that you came to this Four Seasons presentation with a landscape challenge or problem in mind that you want to try to solve. So keep that in mind. I will say this again as we move through this too. Diversity is forgiving, and I just wanted to show these two pictures to exemplify this when you're thinking about your plant material selection. That top picture, there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of different plants working together in that landscape. So if we lost one for some reason, it would probably not be noticeable to the lay viewer, somebody walking by. It would, maybe be able to be a hole that would fill in very, very quickly and seamlessly in the landscape. In the converse, we have this mass planting of these very rigid grasses, and we are going to, we notice right away where some of them have not succeeded. So we have these holes in the landscape. So just keep that in mind. This is one example of how diversity can be your friend. When you're designing your landscape, many of us, I think, have designed our homes, our offices, and interior space. We've customized it to how we want or need it to function for us. The outdoor space is going to be the same mentality. We want to think about the outdoor space like we would be living in it, because ideally we're using it for something. It has a purpose. So let's go back inside real quick. In the kitchen needs to function in a certain way in your landscape. You need to have a refrigerator to keep items cool. Probably need to have some sort of cooking appliance, so oven, stovetop, microwave. You're going to want some utensils in there. You need a space to store those. These are all things that need to be in the kitchen. It doesn't make sense to put the stove in the bedroom because it's not going to be overly useful in there. So you have a certain function for a space in the house. Now we take that outdoors. What do you need a space outdoors to do? And then we want to put into that space elements that are going to help us achieve the function of that. So we need to define the space. Then when it gets to construction, we want to do our hardscapes first. Look at those really heavy elements in the landscape. We invest a lot in them, like a patio, if you will, or like an outdoor kitchen might have a wood burning stove or oven, excuse me. Those are really big, high investment, heavy landscape elements. Those we want to think about first, and then place those kind of in the landscape. We also want to talk about our focal points. Where do we want to look? Where is our attention going to be? Where do we want our attention to be? Do we want to have it Going back to that kitchen window reference, like, is there something we want to look at right outside? Is that our focal point from the indoors? Or are we developing a seating area outdoors and we want to, focus it towards a beautiful tree that's existing in the landscape? Or do we want to direct our view away from, maybe a side yard and push it back towards, a main feature in the yard? Just identify those focal points and design around them. And then you decorate. Once you have this defined, once you have the function of it defined, you have your hardscapes and your really heavy elements kind of laid out and identified, and you know where you want like the attention to be while you're in the space, then you get to do the fun part of decorating and filling in the spaces to really make it evoke a feeling of calm or welcoming or excitement or whatever you've defined as wanting that space to be. So we'll just design a couple of rooms here, right? In the landscape, like we have it inside, they have floors, they have walls, and they have ceilings. And so here's a couple of examples. And so you would have the floors. They look very different, but you know where the floor is. Like you have a pool, that floor is going to move under you if you step into it. But that's a function of that space. With this pathway on the other side of the image, you've got it's like a hallway, if you will, in a landscape. It's pulling you through the space. And this is a very intentional use of that floor element. Then you have walls. Sometimes they're literal walls. Sometimes they are hard, brick. Sometimes they are made of like hedges or plants for a hedgerow. Sometimes they're more implied. You can give the illusion of a wall. I would think of something like a planting of maybe sunflowers, in a line. No, it wouldn't stop you from going through it, but visually it is saying that this is the boundary of this space. And then you've got the ceiling. So you can have a literal ceiling over top on a pergola or in a gazebo or this archway, or it can be the tree canopies, but something kind of above your head to bring down the scale of the great outdoors. Again, how does you want it to function, and how do you want your rooms to relate to each other? So how are you moving through your landscape? How do you get from the rec room, let's say the pool area, to the kitchen, right? You're going to be dripping wet. How do you move from this space to that space? Maybe there's an alleyway or a walkway that you have here, a defined path that you're going through. How do these spaces relate to each other? And how do you move through them? Couple other ideas for your rooms outdoors. A sitting area. So this pond might be, kind of the equivalent of a living room where you have a focal place. You're maybe watching the fish swim. I imagine there's koi fish in there. I don't know. That's just my imagination. But then you've got some seating areas. You can have a conversation, have a calm, enjoyable visit with some friends or family. Then maybe you have, a shed. This is a beautiful shed, but this might be like a closet, just very functional, something that is going to be useful in your landscape. Here they've made it a focal point. They've made it a beautiful element in the landscape, but it's really a functional space. And then again, to the outdoor kitchen, like any scale you want, but are you going to be using your space for entertaining and for cooking? If yes, you're going to want to access some things that are going to make that space more enjoyable, easier to use, and more accommodating. Okay, so now the elements of design. Before we get into these, these are kind of the puzzle pieces that you can put together to achieve the goals that you have defined. I'm only going to go through some of them. There is debate. There is a number of these that I've left off of our presentation. I encourage you to do more research, kind of learn more about these elements of design, learn how that they affect a landscape. Just to kind of like the more you know, the more tools you have in your toolbox to achieve your landscape. But these are some of the ones I think can really get you a long ways down the line in determining or in designing a really lovely landscape. So first, let's talk about lines. So lines are really powerful design tools that help you define a space and or connect spaces or people to spaces. And they can look, different in different landscapes. They can be very crisp. They can be very like rigid, or they can be soft and natural, these photos, I think, kind of illustrate that for us. So we have very defined planting areas. You know where to walk, you know where not to walk. They are made of a hardscape material, but that hardscape material is rough cut or it's worn down over time. It's not such a hard, crisp um, cut with the stone. So that softens it up a little bit as compared to what is in the center picture, where you have these stones that have really, really strict, really defined edges, but it's in a soft curved pattern, can kind of soften it up. Curves add softness to a landscape. And then I have this fence here to remind us that it can be a vertical element that add lines, that draw our eye through the landscape. This fence, you know, you can imagine like what comes past that photo to the right as you draw your eye down that fence line. Like where does it go? What is it, you know, what is it fencing off? Where does it end? And so lines can be really powerful ways to connect us to the landscape. A couple other ones, again, you know, the softness of this brick path kind of, you know, meanders through the landscape and it's pulling you this view. There's a you can tell that there's a grass area out past it, but you don't quite know how big it is. You don't quite know what is out there. And so this path, the way the bricks are lined up, the soft curve of it creates a bit of a mystery. The, you know, use of the arbor here blocks your view, pulls you through the landscape. You know, again, that ceiling element here, when we're looking at this pergola that has, you know, really strict, really defined squares above your head, reflects what's on the seat or on the floor element. Those two lines can help kind of create a space that is more contained. It's not actually pulling you through the landscape at all. Those intersecting lines kind of keep you grounded in that space instead of moving you through it. And then this pool picture, you can see that those lines of that pool are directing you right towards a focal point. It is very intentional. It is very obvious where they want the attention of this landscape to be centered. All right. And now form. So form is basically the three-dimensional mass or three-dimensional shape of plants or of the landscape elements. And so it is defined kind of by the arrangement of branching structures, hardscapes. It is, you know, it is viewed in all seasons. That's why I put this winter picture in here. I really hope you don't forget to design with winter in mind. In the Midwest, we have many months of winter. And so designing a landscape that accommodates or pays attention to how a landscape is going to look in the winter is beneficial. Here's some forms in the landscape. You can see how they help define a space. These two pictures I put in here to show a contrast between the implied and the literal use of form. So on the left, you can see there's a literal ceiling. There's a literal pergola. That is a space that is defined. The form of this pergola with the vines growing over it is very, it's literal. Now, the picture on the right kind of implies that there might be a ceiling there. All of those posts are the exact same height. The plant material in the in between is also, you know, approximately that height. So it kind of implies that there is a ceiling or there's an upper limit to this landscape, when in fact there's not. It goes on forever. And so you can play with which do you prefer? Do you prefer that more cozy, defined, very hard ceiling, or do you prefer something that might be implied in that form that is a little bit more suggestive? Oh, and then color. Color might be one of our favorites, right? So color can be very eye-catching and it can influence your mood. There's a whole, you know, color theory that we're not going to get into today, but there's a lot of feelings and moods that can be invoked depending on the colors that you choose and the way that you use them. And so these pictures obviously are vastly different from each other. And you probably, as you look at each one, have just kind of a different reaction to them. They can be personal as well. And so there's no right or wrong reaction to them, but you can see the colors, you know, in this, you have the Rudbeckia and this like mass planting. We've got yellows and pinks and purples. Like those can be lively. They can be joyful, kind of invoke happiness. They are complementary, and so those two colors work really nicely together, the purple hues and the yellow hues. And then you go to the center picture where it's more subtle, but you've got this bright red berry there. And that can be like really stunning in a landscape, really in small amounts. Like you can see it here where just a few berries really pop and catch your eye and maybe get you excited, kind of get your interest up. Then you've got this monochromatic landscape with all the greens. There's different colors of greens. There's different plants used in it, but it's kind of like a green and white color scheme. The use of color like this, where it's a monochromatic planting, can be very calming, can be healing, it can be soothing, and create kind of harmony in the landscape. And so it just depends on what you're going for. But the use of color can be really, really fun to play with and can be really impactful in your landscape. A couple of pictures here, you can see just examples of this. So again, winter, don't forget about winter because you've got white, you've got kind of a monochromatic color scheme happening naturally in many of our winter landscapes where we have our plants that have gone dormant for the season, but you would still maybe have some color pops here and there. For example, imagine if this black fence was painted red. That would be an entirely different feeling in that landscape. Um, or you can come over to this house that has red, like all over it. It's exciting. There's a lot to look at. It's full of activity. There's a lot happening in that landscape. As then you compare it to the monochromatic, photos of kind of the hues here. That is, different. It evokes different feelings. I would imagine you all would say that this is going to evoke different feelings for you. All right, and then we've got texture. So texture is a little more challenging, I think, for people to grasp. I hope we can help you define and help you kind of get the idea of texture. What texture does is it helps when you have a variety of texture in a landscape, it helps add interest. Regardless of what you're using for color, regardless of the lines, it can help just create visual interest at a larger scale or a smaller scale. So it can be, I want us to look at the picture here on the left with the grasses and the echinacea. You can see it at that smaller scale. It is literally the relationship, the size relationship between the plant materials. The leaves are just literally different sizes. And so that creates like a small, finer texture in those grasses and a more coarse, rugged texture in the echinacea leaves. That creates some interest and some contrast. With the sedums here, you can see, also where there is, just different scales, different sizes of the leaves, and that can add texture. You also have hardscapes incorporated into both of these. You've got a hardscape wall behind, and you've got some pebbles in this other picture. Like that visually adds interest when you've got that contrast between something that to be a very firm material and then something that is a more soft material like plants. When you zoom out from a landscape at a larger scale, texture can be achieved through the spacing of plants and the massing of plants. So when you have a finer, like the grasses here in a mass, you can create a space that has an abundance of fine texture, but you place that next to something that has a more coarse leaves or a harder landscape, and you can create that contrast and that texture as well. Scale. And you have scale. So scale is there's a lot of variety in scale. It can be complementary. It can also be overwhelming if not applied right. And so pay attention to just the size of your landscape and the size of the elements you're putting into it, and try to have them complement each other in a way that is where they would match each other. So I want you to imagine standing up next to this sunflower, like the scale with which you are viewing it is up close. You can see details, you can see elements of it that you would not see otherwise if you were viewing it from far away. Now, if you had a lot of sunflowers, or this is a huge sunflower, the difference between a really large sunflower and then a smaller sunflower is going to have a different impact in the landscape. Then on here where these folks are resting, you've got a space that is kind of cozy, is more compact, it's closer. There's not going to be able to fit as many people in it, but that's going to invoke a feeling of comfort, of the placement and the use of that space is affecting the way that it is feeling. Let me show a few pictures. I'm just doing a couple of slides that show a difference in like scale in a landscape and how it can have a difference, can make you feel different things. And so first, I want us to look at this picture, this very formal garden. It is open, it is broad. You can see the scale of the landscape with the people in it. You could fit a lot of people in this space. And if you're in it, you can imagine feeling kind of small, like you're feeling kind of not as dominant in the landscape versus a space like this. And you can imagine people sitting on these chairs. This is more cozy, more intimate, just a very different feel, different scale of landscape. Here we have a landscape of a rose garden. It is expansive. There's a lot of roses in this rose garden. This pathway goes on for a long ways. You can see some people there at the terminus of the walkway. A big landscape, as opposed to something like these landscapes where it is more intimate, it is more defined, and it is at the smaller scale. So just a different feeling that you're achieving. So as we wrap up, I want to talk about a few of the different design styles. Now, I don't want to go through these and say one is right, one is wrong, or you have to choose one strictly. These I'm presenting to you so that they can be as inspiration. They can serve as inspiration as you thumb through different pictures and you can have different reactions to them and say, "Ooh, I like that. What do I like about that?" Or, "Ooh, I do not like that. Something is not hitting me right." You can help define that and then move on, or avoid doing that particular element in your landscape. So real quick, then we'll get to some questions. So there's the formal and pristine landscapes. I think everyone has, seen these, knows about these. They are French and Victorian, um, like high fashion design of a landscape, especially of the Victorian era where it was a status symbol. Your landscape was a status symbol. There's patterns in small spaces, intertwining knots and circles are often elements used in these. Generally speaking, very high maintenance landscapes. A hedge like the one here in this picture is going to require a lot of pruning and maintenance over the course of a year. Simultaneously, if you lose one of these hedges, you are going to notice. So this is again going to be one of those high maintenance landscapes from the standpoint of making sure everything lives so that it looks in a certain way. And then we've got your cottage style, pretty much the exact opposite of what we just looked at, which is it was developed in around the 18th century in England. Out of necessity, people needed to have their landscapes function in a way that was going to support their living. And so you would have herbs in the garden, you would have vegetables, you would have fruits and fruit trees producing an edible harvest. You'd often be keeping bees for honey, which would require to have blooming plants. And then you could have livestock and, like an outer pasture area, but more of a cozy, eclectic planting plan, if you will, but functional, dense plantings. And then you have Oriental influenced gardens. These would be, contemplation gardens. You would have kind of a minimalistic style in them. Japanese or Asian gardens is what we would sometimes refer to these as, but they don't necessarily have to be, strict in using those images and those types of focal points. It would just be something that is calmer, monochromatic, if you will, mostly green. Sometimes you would have some pops of color here and there for as a focal point to invoke a certain emotion. Sound is also something that would be incorporated into some of these landscapes, and we haven't talked much about sound, but like running water, chimes, the landscape can have a sound to it. And so an Oriental influence landscape would also consider having elements um, that add sound. And then the naturalistic landscape, this one is kind of a renewed passion of people or a new trend. So naturalistic landscapes tend to use native plants or plants that are native plant adjacent um, in a planting pattern. Oftentimes that tries to mimic or kind of resemble a native prairie, taller or short grass prairies. There's oftentimes not, well, like I should take that back. There are kind of two different ways of planting these, which would be one that is very naturalistic. It's a very live and let live kind of mentality, as you can kind of see in that top landscape, usually within a very defined space in the landscape. So it's not taking over the entire yard. It's not just completely undefined, but within a planting bed, you've got some more, just more loose planting plan. They are usually lower maintenance and require less water and less fertilizer needs. Um, Down below, now this is the Lowry Garden in Chicago. Highly recommend going and visiting. But this is a planting plan that is similar in the mentality of using natural or native plants and having kind of a loose form to it, but it is not low maintenance at all. And you can do this too. It creates habitat. I saw a fox family living in this garden when I was there last. So there's definitely habitat that has been created in this space, but with a more intentional planting plan. You can see these masses of blue salvia, blooming here. A little higher maintenance, but still that naturalistic look, just implemented in a different way. And then you got minimalistic. And so you've got kind of like architectural, like the plants are used as like sculptural elements. In some places, you can see this picture here where these boxwood are very intentionally pruned into these round shapes. High maintenance landscape in that scenario. But then another minimalistic approach would be to have just repeating plants, like you've got a hosta garden. That to me would be a minimalistic landscape where you've got repeating elements, very similar elements, but probably a little more forgiving than this highly manicured boxwood hedge. Repetition of elements would be a key feature in a minimalistic landscape. Oh, and then we've got eclectic and colorful landscape design style. And this can be incorporated into any of the other landscape element styles, excuse me, landscape styles that we have already discussed, or your entire landscape could be just full of these whimsical elements. And so oftentimes it is, it is from deriving ideas or style or taste from a broad and diverse range. I like to think of it as if you cannot choose one, choose them all, and you have an eclectic and colorful landscape. And I've seen some landscapes that are eclectic and colorful. And personally, it's not my favorite style, but they are stunning because they have been executed in a way that is just really, really thoughtful, really intentional, and exciting and a delight to be a part of. So in summary, seek some resources, like visit gardens, do internet searches, revisit this webinar when it gets posted, look through books, like earmark things that you like, do that assessment, figure out what you are drawn to, and what is going to help make your landscape serve your needs and be in service of your desired outcome. Start small. It can always be expanded, but start with a small space in your landscape, decide how much you want to take on or learn from your mistakes at the small scale, and then scale up over time. This also helps with the budget. You can kind of get a feel for how much things are going to cost or how much maintenance things are going to require. Then plan ahead. The whole presentation today has been talking about kind of planning ahead, making some decisions before you start doing anything in the landscape, because you are going to, you will exponentially increase your odds of getting the landscape that you desire if you do that plan ahead work. And then finally, experiment and have fun. There is no right or wrong way to do this. It is meant to be a reflection of you and your family's unique and wonderful needs and personality. And so it should be an enjoyable experience for you. I want to give credit where credit is due for the photos. I hope you enjoyed the photos. I had a really wonderful time looking through them and hoping to find some that would help you understand what we're talking about, maybe gain some inspiration that you can take forward with you. And so I appreciate the resources that are available to obtain those photos. To view past recordings of Four Season, and there are a lot of them, please go to go.illinois.edu Four Seasons recordings. They are all on there, and this one will be posted in due time